Okay, welcome back. This is module 2 of lecture 6, and the topic of this module is key value coding and key value observing and binding. A key value coding is a mechanism that allows you to set and get the value of a variable by the name of that variable. And you might think this is what we do all the time, and you're right, this is what we do all the time. We get a variable, we create some name for that variable, and then we use this name to get the value or to set the value. There's another way to access this variable, to get the value and to set its value, and this is the method that is similar to how we work with dictionaries in Module 1. Every variable created in Objective-C could be accessed by its key, by the name of that variable. So in this example, we have a class name, a class student, and NS string, which is the only variable here. And then we can get to set this key to basically set the value for this first name variable by doing this. Set value and then pass the value we want to set, and then for key colon, set the key that we want to change. And the key is always an NS string, the name of the variable. And this is a stupid example because we could just say first name equals and do that. This is right, but a key value coding is just one side of this deal. The other side is key value observing. And key value observing is an idea of observing the key and doing something when this key changes. So instead of checking every time if something changed, we can just observe this key, and every time something happens to this key, react in some way. We're going to talk about key value observing manually in the following lectures, but for now, let's try something simpler. Let's try to use bindings. And bindings in Objective-C is basically using this idea of key value observing in a more visual way. So I just created a simple project in Xcode. This is Cocoa project, and I put a horizontal slider and label and a button. I didn't change anything. They are all default ones. I just put them all in this nice fashion. So I want to do the following. I want this label to show the value of some integer I have in my program. And I want the slider to change the value of that integer. So when I move the slider, I want the integer changed, and as a result, the label changed. And this button will increment the same integer by 1. So when I hit this button, I want to see both the slider move and the label changed. So we have everything we need for the interface so far. Let's go to our header file and create that variable that we're going to use. So this is a simple integer. I'm going to call it temp. Now let's go to my, oh yeah, by the way, I forgot to change this to presentation so you can see a big font. So I want to override the init function. So the function that is called when we create our window. So it is, of course, the init function that returns ID. It will return itself, so we can just start with this. We have to call the init function of the superclass, so we have to do this. And if everything is fine, so if self is not nil, then let's use this key value coding. Let's say self set value, and the value I want to set is number 0. And let's just create NS number on the fly. Number with integer 0. For key, and this is the name of the key, and it's called temp. And this is fine. Okay, let's go back to the interface now. I have this slider, and two things I want to do to the slider is I wanted to make it continuous, so I can move the slider to any direction and any value will be in there, so it's not like it's gonna jump from a value to value. I want the slider to be from 0 to 100, and by default it's just like that, and I want the default current value when it starts to be 0. Okay, most important thing is here. This is the binding tab of the sidebar, and I want to bind this slider to my variable, and I have different binding things here. I can bind the maximum value, the minimum value, and I want just to bind the value. So I'm going to select my app delegate, and I want to bind it to self.temp. So now those two things are tied together, the integer temp and the value of the slider. So whenever I change the integer in any way, the slider will move accordingly. And if I move the slider, then the integer will be changed. So by default, we have this getter and setter because this is just an integer. We can change the value, but we can write our own because most of the time we want to do something more when this changed. In this case, we want to update the value of the label when the integer is changed. So I guess the first thing we have to do is create an outlet for the label because we want to access this label. We want to do something to that label. So I'm going to click on that label and then control click. And create a new outlet. I'm going to just call it a label. Actually, since we're here, let's just create an action for this button. We're going to use it later. So we're going to do the same, but instead of outlet, I'm going to select action, and I'm going to call this increment. This will be an action to increment the value of my my integer. So now we have an outlet for this label, and we can access this label. So let's go back to here, and as you can see, it created the increment action for us. We're gonna come back to that later. For now, let's create our own getters and setters. So first is the setter. It returns nothing, and it should be called setTemp. If I decide to use another name, it's fine, but it won't be called when this key is changed. So I have to really follow the same name that it would create for us by default. I'm gonna say this will take an integer x. And of course, the only reason we're doing this is the main reason at least, we want to change the temp to x. But another thing is I want to update the value of that label we just created outlet for. So I'm going to say label set string value, and since it expects ns string, I'm going to create a new ns string here and have a string with format and create a simple format here, just an integer x, and this is fine. Next, we have to create a getter, and the getter for the integer, of course, should return an integer and have to be called temp for the same reason I explained earlier, and it should return temp. Okay, so now if I run this application, hopefully we will see this. I moved the slider and the integer changed, and because we are calling this setTemp, in here we are changing the value of the label. So we didn't have to create watchers, but Xcode did it for us. It basically created a watcher, and it watches the value and it reacts to the change of that value. Okay, so the other thing I want to have is for this button to increment the value, and this is really easy. I'm going to do the same using the set temp, and I have to take the temp and increment it. So if I run this again, I will see this. This is the binding in a nutshell. And we're going to use this a lot. We're going to use key value coding and observing in this course a lot, because this is really a great way to connect different things in your code together and not worry about how to wait for events to happen when those values change. So the next one is module 3, and see you there.